Ask, and you shall receive. Hello, what is up, guys? I'm Evil Do Us Harm here, and we're going to be bringing you some ASMR patch note reading content. Today's video will read all of the really cool blue boxes that went with all of the class balance changes with the most recent patch to Black Desert on May 26th of 2021. And now quickly before we get into that, if you are new to my channel and you still haven't subscribed yet, please consider it. How many content creators do you know would listen to all of the feedback from their audience and give them what they really want? So even if you think I'm a complete idiot for doing this, at least I'm dedicated to this and I deserve the sub. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into it and let's start off with the new and improvement section talking about the class balance changes. The class balance patch that you've all been waiting for is finally here. This update brings a bunch of changes, both big and small, to all classes. The focus of this update was to make improvements to all the classes. However, regardless of the upgrades made to the entire class or classes that were already considered strong, adjustments and nerfs inevitably had to be made for certain skills that were too powerful in comparison to the overall changes being implemented in this balance patch. We will monitor these changes specifically on the official servers and make additional changes as needed. Improvements for all classes will continue to be developed after this balance patch. We are continuously checking the feedback left by adventurers on the official website, the official Discord, and other platforms. So we hope you're looking forward to more of these kinds of updates. Finally, as the Arena of Arsha draws to a close in North America and Europe, we would like to thank all of our adventurers once more for taking this tournament to the next level. To build upon this class balance patch, an Adventurer Roundtable, ART for short, for all classes will be conducted once the Arena of Arsha ends. The information we gather about each class through this ART will be carefully reviewed and taken into consideration for future updates. Thank you again for all of the love and support. The first blurb is about the Warrior. Adventurers who play Warrior in succession form often use Chopping Kick or Sideways Cut and then follow it up with Absolute Spinning Slash to gain a critical hit rate increase buff. This way, skills can be linked to create deadly combos that deal high amounts of damage. If we analyze this combo, the reason why the absolute version of Spinning Slash, one of the most important skills in this combo, has to be used is because Spinning Slash alone does not have a critical hit rate increase buff. To account for this, Prime Spinning Slash has been buffed to improve the execution and stability of this combo. Our next blue blurb falls under the Sorceress. For Sorceress, although she has skills like Nightcrow and Nightmare that offer high survivability, she was designed with a lower accuracy to compensate for this. But as adventurers became stronger, this advantage became less useful over time. To make this aspect of the Sorceress more relevant, Grim Reaper and Prime Abyssal Vanguard will now have an accuracy buff so that adventurers can make use of this advantage once again when needed. Sorceress's Awakening has also seen some buffs, with the duration of Nightmare now being longer so that the skill can be more easily used during combat. Our next section focuses on the Ranger. For Ranger's succession form, we divided our focus into two parts, PvP and PvE. For the PvP aspect of the class, we've made a few adjustments according to the expected growth of adventurers, so that this form is more viable to play. Damage for some skills has been increased, and changes were made to create stronger emphasis between the class's skill, concepts, and lore. So in order to increase her survivability, Prime Razorwind 4's forward guard buff will now continue to stay active, even when returning to a standby stance after using the skill. We also implemented a suggestion that was made many times by adventurers. Evasive Explosion Shot and Flow Air Explosion Shot can now be used as separate skills, so Ranger can now rely on Evasive Explosion Shot to get out of dangerous situations quickly. We also focus on increasing the damage output for some skills and creating a stronger emphasis between the class's skills, concept, and lore for the Ranger's PvE components as well. When using Call of the Earth in her succession form, the Spirit Summoned will now gain more energy and increase her damage. Also, just like Call of the Earth's cooldown, these energized spirits will remain as a buff for 60 seconds after the skill is used. For Awakening, using Regeneration will now leave a Seed of Nature in its place, and using other skills, Wailing Wind, Elven Range, Windblade, Vine Knot, Nature's Tremble, will cause vines to grow from the seed's location to deal damage. Regeneration damage plus 100% critical rate minus PV only. You can use it with combos, and, depending on the situation, place it so that it explodes to attack your enemies from behind. However, this effect only occurs once per regeneration. Next up, we have the beloved Berserker. A special trait of the Berserker succession that sets it apart from his Awakening is that the destructiveness of an attack depends on striking your opponent with your shoulder. To make this unique trait into a more defining feature of the Berserker, the cooldown for Shake Off has been decreased to create more opportunities to execute shoulder-based attacks. Also, you can now use Lava Piercer and then combo it with its Prime version, which will allow the Berserker to chase opponents that dodge his initial shoulder attack. When it comes to Berserker in PvE, we've taken into account that many adventurers use Prime Frenzied Destroyer after Prime Raging Thunder, or Feral Rage as a combo. To expand combat options while making sure this combo remains relevant, Prime Fearsome Tyrant and Prime Beastly Windslash 3 will now inflict more damage so that Berserker can clean up the remaining opponents who survived his initial Prime Frenzied Destroyer onslaught. And next up we have the Tamer. In order for the Tamer to use Flow Ascension after using Garuda, Celestial Slam had to be locked. Since this limited the skills the Tamer could use when this specific situation arose, the controls of Flow Ascension have been changed so that Celestial Slam can now be used. Flow Ascension will also inflict Bound as a status effect on opponent, so that the Tamer will still have chances to turn the tide of battle if Garuda's floating effect is not applied. Next up we have the Valkyrie. Even with the improvements made to other classes, some of Valkyrie's skills were too overpowered for PvP that nerfs had to be made. However, unlike other classes, most of the changes revolve around the settings for crystals and the effects that can be implemented even when using a skill. In terms of the skills, Heaven's Echo will no longer apply a permanent accuracy rate increase effect. Instead, the effect will now last for only 10 seconds. However, the skill's defense increase effect has been buffed significantly to make Valkyrie tougher to take down in combat. In addition, Flow Spinning Shield has been changed as well. The skill's status effects will now only apply on the first hit. For Valkyrie's Awakening, changes were made to account for PvE combat. Verdict Lancia Lucite was widely known as Valkyrie's core skill and signature move, but the skill's effectiveness has decreased over time. To make up for this, we've increased the damage of the skill and its cooldown time so that adventurers do not have to be too dependent on shield throw. We hope this adds to the awesome combat styles that the Lancia has to offer, and hopefully reduce that button fatigue. And next up we have the Musa, and when it comes to Musa's Awakening, we've decided to up the tempo of his attacks to match his quick and deadly combat style. Musa's Spinner skill will now apply the attack speed increase effect for on every hit, whereas before it only applied on the third hit. To ensure that the block effect can be implemented smoothly when comboing Crush Crusher and Eradicate, the transition from Crush Crusher to Eradicate will now happen more quickly. To top off the balance changes, the damage from below the belt and Flow Dash Slash has been increased, and the number of PvP hits applied with Fire Crevice has been decreased. Moving on to the Maewa, the skill that most closely symbolizes Maewa is her Red Moon skill. So unlike Absolute Red Moon, you could not use a different skill after using Prime Red Moon, which you learn after Succession, to hit floating targets. Although it is a stronger version of the skill, the inability to connect this skill to another put it at a disadvantage. Thus, we've changed Prime Red Moon so that it can now be used more flexibly and with less limitations. Next up, we have the highly anticipated, or dreaded depending on who you ask, Witch and Wizard changes. We've received a lot of requests to nerf Wizard and Witch because of how much they influence Node and Conquest Wars. When we looked into the actual data, we found that they maintained the top spots in determining the outcome of Node Wars and Conquest Wars, and the biggest reason behind this was their ability to consistently deliver explosive amounts of damage. The reason why we didn't make any adjustments to their damage output until now was because, aside from Node and Conquest Wars, these two classes perform just above average in all other areas of the game, compared to all the other classes. However, regardless of the damage output, we've decided that some of Wizards and Witch's skills have too much sway in large-scale combat modes. Thus, certain skills have been nerfed in a way that makes them riskier to use. Super Armor will no longer be applied when using Meteor Shower and Primevoltaic Pulse, so adventurers will have to take an extra caution in assessing their surroundings and timing their attacks well. However, Witch's movement skills are comparatively weaker than those of the Wizards, so the cooldown of Succession Magical Evasion has been decreased by 1 second. We will continue to monitor and check the data for these two classes, and we promise to make the necessary adjustments depending on the situation. As far as the Ninja goes, we've also made some improvements to the Ninja for PvP situations. The recently added Flashing Light skill has been changed so that it is easier to chain other attacks after using the skill, which in turn makes it less punishing when Flashing Light misses the opponent. The transition between the main weapon and the Awakening skills have been changed so that they happen much more smoothly, and Suicide Fall has been implemented so that it can be now comboed in Awakening form. Also, the accuracy rate effect after using Asura has been increased so that this skill will make Ninja more effective when facing off against opponents specializing in defense or evasion. To make Ninja more effective in PvE as well, we turned our focus to his Awakening form. There are many situations in which Ninja will change over to his main weapon after using Drastic Measure, Bloodthirst, Katana Shower, Serpent Ascension in his Awakening form, especially to chase after targets. Now using Corrupt Sword Dance, Sudden Decapitation, Sura Chaos Spree, and Seamless in Double Sword Stance will pierce through targets, making it easier to attack them. In addition, the damage of ninja's main skills have been increased so that adventurers will have as much fun dealing damage as executing his flashy attacks. And for the female counterpart to the ninja, the Kuniichi, the succession skill Prime Shackles is one that is not used as often as her other skills. In response to this, we have increased the skill's PvP damage. We have also changed the transitions between the main weapon and awakening skills so that they happen much more smoothly, and Suicide Fall has been improved so that it can now be comboed in awakening form. Moving on to the Dark Knight, many changes both big and small have been made to the Dark Knight to strengthen the qualities that really set her apart from the other classes. First, the invincibility effect for Dusk will now be applied for a longer period of time. In addition, Twilight Dash will now also apply super armor. Since these are some of Dark Knight's most important movement skills, Dark Knight can rely on these skills more to get out of troublesome situations during combat. In addition, we've made improvements to Nocturne and the skill's ability to combo into other skills so that it can be utilized more effectively as a dodging mechanic. Lastly, we've increased the PvP damage of various main skills for her awakening and succession forms so that the Dark Knight lifts up to her name when she cuts down her opponents using her Kriegsmesser, Phantom Blade, and magic attacks. Now the Striker is also seeing some upgrades in this patch, with the focus on making Prime Wolf's Hunger, a succession skill, a more aggressive and viable skill to use during combat. When using this skill to apply stun on the first hit, or for movement purposes, other skills can now be chained to this one so that the Striker will be able to stick to his opponents in continuous flurry of attacks. The skill effects for Martial Spirit will also now be applied to more skills than before, so that accuracy rate increase effects can be applied to combos executed in both succession and awakening forms. Next up is the female counterpart, the Mystic, and since Mystic's combat style relies heavily on approaching enemies and managing Martial Spirit shards, which is required to deal damage to her enemies, overall improvements needed to be made to these two areas in the balance patch. In light of this, Mystic can now collect more Martial Spirit shards in her succession form, and the skills requiring these shards will deal more damage. For her awakening form, an effect decreasing all speed stats for Dragon's Rip has been added. Overall, the damage for main skills has been increased, which will truly put fear into the hearts of her opponents when they see her descend upon the battlefield. Speaking of descend, moving on to the class that can fly, the Lan, some of Lan's succession skills have been adjusted in this update after it was determined that they would deal lower amounts of damage despite the actual movements of the attack. Since Lan's awakening skills have a shorter range than her succession skills, the overall damage of her main awakening skills have been increased to make up for this difference. In addition to these changes, we've also decreased the amount of stamina needed to use Dismemberment so that adventurers can worry less about having to manage stamina consumption in the middle of combat. To spice up the combat, Stately Dignity will now have a short cooldown time and a longer range so that its pull mechanic can be better utilized in combat. For Lan's Awakening, we've decreased the cooldown time of Flow Vice so that using Tailspin and then Flow Vice in succession will be more viable as a combo. Prime Crescent Charm will now have an increased critical hit rate, while Annihilator will now apply an all AP damage increase effect. With these damage buffs, Lan can continue to conduct her deadly dance of death on the battlefield. Next up we have the Archer, and in a previous update, new skills were added for Archer in order to make up for his lack of block effects. For ranged attacks, his main skills are Luthragon's Call, Piercing Light, and Regis Smite. With this patch, the number of charges needed for Piercing Light have been decreased, and the damage of Righteous Smite has been increased so that these attacks will be all the more threatening when engaging in long-range combat. In terms of melee combat and PvE, one of Archer's key skills is Full Bloom. However, Archer's choice of hunting grounds inevitably became limited due to his combat style and skills. To rectify this issue, the damage for all of his skills have been increased so that Full Bloom can still be used as an alternative in ranged combat. In addition, we've made improvements to Spear of Sylvia so that it deals more damage on hunting grounds where down attack is primarily used to hunt. For the Shy, the balance changes aim to emphasize her skills and role in group battles. Dungeon content. Delusive Light, which had some ambiguous debuffs, has been revamped so that it will now considerably reduce an opponent's combat abilities. Shout to the Sky 3 will now apply an effect that will consistently heal allies, allowing them to last longer on the field of battle. Moving on to Guardian, the succession skill Prime Frigid Wind has been improved so that it can now be activated while using Juggernaut, similar to how the skill can be linked while in awakening form. Changes have also been made to Flow to Ashes, so that Guardian has an easier time hitting her targets with skill in combat. The Hashin ability Arid Assault is arguably the skill that is the most representative of the Hashin as a class, and it remains one of the most powerful and unique skills in the world of Black Desert. However fun it may be to use, many adventurers who fought against Hashin found themselves unable to cope with the onslaught of his attacks. Since this skill, in all aspects, is extremely powerful, we've added an initial movement animation to the skill so that opponents can, at the very least, see Hashin's movements, when they have visibility of him of course, and be able to react in a way that will even the odds of battle. For Hashin's Awakening, Silent Breach can now be used immediately after an assault to perform a combo, and the cooldown for Flow Condemnation has been reduced so that it can be utilized more often and across a wider spectrum of combat situations. Moving on to that girl from Calpheon, Star's Ring is an awakening skill in Nova's repertoire that is useful for binding opponents or creating attack combos. Although it is a highly useful skill, the ease in which this attack could be used became problematic since opponents who got caught in were faced with very limited and difficult options when trying to escape. As a result, Star's Ring has been changed so that if Nova fails to fully pull in a target into the center of her attack, opponents can escape more easily. Now, Nova must use this skill more carefully and accurately than before. And finally was the Sage, who didn't get a blue box, so there's nothing for me to say about the Sage.